Heavy winter twilight was descending over Boston. Dark gray clouds like a woolen blanket enveloped the tops of skyscrapers. Streetlights flickered on one by one, their dim light reflecting in frozen puddles, creating ghostly glimmers. Cold wind chased empty paper coffee cups down the deserted streets, while scattered pedestrians, wrapped in scarves and coats, hurried to find shelter in the warmth of their homes. A special silence hung in the air, the kind that only exists in winter, when snow muffles the sounds of the city, leaving only the whisper of wind and the distant hum of cars. On Beacon Street, in the shadow of skyscrapers, stands an old Gothic building, once a prestigious insurance agency. Now its black windows look out at the world with empty eyes, and the wind whistles through the cracks between the bricks, as if whispering warnings to those who dare to enter. Michael Rodriguez shivered, pressing himself against the built-in wall in the alley. His frost-cracked hands, once skilled with construction tools, now helplessly tried to find warmth in his thin jacket. 45 years of life, and all that remained were empty pockets and an unbearable urge to place one more bet. The thermometer at the neighboring pharmacy showed -10. The unlocked service entrance door seemed like a gift from heaven. A faded banner hung on the facade, announcing the building's future reconstruction. Michael slipped inside, where he was enveloped by the smell of old plaster and dust, like a shroud. In the darkness of the corridors, his footsteps echoed, merging with the creaking of the old floor and the distant hum of the city. The stairs creaked under his weight as he climbed higher and higher, floor by floor. On the 7th floor, luck smiled upon him, a relatively warm office with intact windows. Michael settled near the wall, spreading out his worn sleeping bag. Through the dirty glass of the panoramic window, he watched snowflakes dance in the streetlight, creating an illusion of peace. Lying in the darkness, he couldn't help but think about his life. About the days when he was a respected contractor with his own crew. About his first visit to the casino, which seemed so innocent. About how he gradually lost everything. Savings, house, family. Now he was just another ghost in the city that had long learned to ignore people like him. His loneliness was so tangible that it seemed he could touch it with his hand, like the cold walls of this abandoned building. Michael jolted awake from the cold. For several seconds, he stared disoriented at the window through which he had watched snowy Boston during the night. Something was wrong. His heart skipped a beat. Outside, a massive figure blocked most of the window, its demonic silhouette outlined against the gray winter sky. He moved to the corner office to view it from a different angle and make sure it wasn't a hallucination. It was a stone gargoyle, a grotesque creature with bat-like wings, an elongated muzzle, and fangs protruding from its twisted maw. Its cracked surface was covered with dark stains that looked too much like dried blood. Michael was absolutely certain that the gargoyle hadn't been there during the night. He had spent hours watching the snowfall. The enormous stone monster would have undoubtedly blocked the entire view from the window. But now it was there, as if materializing from thin air, defying all laws of physics and common sense. He rubbed his eyes, trying to convince himself it was just a play of light and shadow, but the massive figure remained in place. The longer he stared, the more details he noticed. Deep scratches on the stone that formed incomprehensible symbols, and the eyes, empty sockets that seemed to stare straight into his soul. The gaze sent chills down his spine, and Michael instinctively crawled away from the window. Fear gradually seeped into his consciousness like cold water seeping through fabric. This wasn't ordinary fright. No, it was something much deeper and more primitive. The same instinctive terror our ancestors felt hearing predators howl in the darkness of their caves. Michael tried to convince himself that it was just a sculpture, merely a bizarre creation of some ancient architect. But something deep within his being that part responsible for survival, screamed of danger. His hands were shaking, and not from the cold anymore. His breathing became ragged, and his heart felt like it would burst from his chest. Even with his back turned to the window, he could still feel that stone gaze, as if the gargoyle was emanating some dark, ancient force that penetrated the walls. Trying to distract himself from the eerie discovery, he spent the day rummaging through the building's floors. He hoped to find something valuable: copper pipes, cable remnants, anything that could be sold for even a few dollars. But he found nothing except dust and old papers. As the sun began to set, Michael returned to his temporary shelter. He froze at the doorway. The gargoyle was gone. Just gone. At that moment, he heard a sound that made his hair stand on end. A low grinding of stone against stone coming from the depths of the floor. The sound was getting closer, and then he saw it. A giant shadow. Unnatural. Impossible. The shadow was moving. Panic clouded his mind, but survival instinct took over. Michael pressed himself against the wall, trying to control his breathing. Each breath seemed thunderous in the dead silence of the corridor. He could hear his heart pounding in his temples, counting down the seconds to his possible death. He peered around the corner. The stairs were close, but to reach them, he would have to cross an absolutely empty and open space. The massive figure of the creature moved unnaturally slowly, as if savoring its prey's fear. Its claws scraped the floor, leaving deep grooves in the concrete. The creature prowled through the offices on the floor. Michael noticed an overturned file cabinet. Perhaps if he moved quietly enough, he could hide behind it halfway to the stairs. He began to carefully move forward, measuring each step. Time stretched like rubber. Dust swirling in the air tickled his nostrils, and he desperately held back a sneeze, pressing his hand tightly over his mouth. Suddenly, the scraping stopped. The silence proved more terrifying than the sounds of pursuit. Michael froze, afraid to even breathe. Somewhere in the darkness of the corridor came a soft rustling, as if the creature was sniffing the air. He could almost physically feel its empty eye sockets probing the darkness in search of prey. The walls seemed to close in around him. The corridor had become a trap with no escape. Michael pressed himself to the floor behind a pile of construction debris, feeling cold sweat running down his back. He knew one careless movement, one sound, and this ancient creature would find him. His footsteps echoed through the empty corridors, merging with the heavy grinding sound that relentlessly approached from behind. His heart pounded in his chest like a jackhammer, and his mouth went dry with fear. He turned the corner and pressed himself against the wall, trying to calm his ragged breathing. The sound of stone claws on concrete resembled the screech of a grinding stone on metal. Michael slipped behind an overturned conference table and pressed himself to the floor. Dust filled his nostrils, but he didn't dare even sneeze. The stairs were only 30 feet away, 30 feet between life and death. On the opposite wall appeared the gargoyle's shadow, a twisted silhouette with wings. The creature was sniffing, turning its grotesque head from side to side. Michael could hear its stone joints creaking eerily with each movement. The claws were slowly approaching. Dust danced in the moonlight that penetrated through the dirty windows. Michael closed his eyes, desperately praying for this ancient creature, this stone demon, to pass by. Instead, the scraping stopped right next to his hiding place. When he opened his eyes, he saw it. A massive gargoyle loomed over him, filling the space with its enormous stone figure. Its gigantic wings spread across the entire width of the corridor. Empty eye sockets pierced the darkness with an eerie red glow that made the air seem thick and heavy. Time stood still. Michael's body was frozen with terror, as if the very presence of the ancient creature was draining the life from him. He could only helplessly stare into its blood-red eye sockets. realizing that he had become another victim of this otherworldly predator. His mind was flooded with paralyzing fear. He knew that even if he screamed, no one would hear him in this abandoned building. The cold stone walls absorbed all sounds, leaving him alone with this ancient horror. The air was heavy with the smell of dust and decay, mixed with something primordial and unnatural emanating from the creature. The gargoyle leaned closer, its stone face just inches from his face. Michael felt the icy breath of eternity emanating from the creature. In his final moment, he watched as its jaws opened, revealing rows of sharp stone teeth. An unbearable stench of rotting flesh and sulfur hit his nostrils as the creature opened its maw. The suffocating smell made his head spin. This wasn't just the stench of death, but the breath of otherworldly horror, ancient evil lurking in stone form. Michael screamed, but his desperate cry was lost in the evening bustle of the city. Just a few dozen meters away, thousands of people hurried home, talked on their phones, laughed, and lived their normal lives, completely unaware of the horror unfolding in the dark corridors of the abandoned building. The next morning, Jason Miller walked down the sidewalk, checking messages on his phone. Something dripped onto the phone screen. He mechanically touched the screen and looked at his finger. It was red. Slowly raising his head, he saw it, the gargoyle on the building's ledge. Its maw was smeared with fresh blood, and its empty eye socket seemed to stare directly at him. And only someone very observant might notice how, in the morning sunlight, the stone figure shifted ever so slightly, making itself more comfortable while waiting for its next hunt.